Good morning. This is Dr. Mike, and this is lecture 3 of week 1 of our Introduction to Philosophy class. And today we're going to talk about a very weighty subject, and that is, what is the meaning of life? It's one of the things that the ancient Greeks began with Socrates and Aristotle and Plato to contemplate, and then we go into Immanuel Kant and Albert Camus and many others down through the years have talked about what life is, what gives life meaning. And so I think it's a very pertinent subject to be speaking about during this particular time in our history when we are seem to be encompassed with COVID and war in Ukraine, and sometimes we despair of life. And I found that to be true among the young people that I teach. I'm 65 and I was born in 1957. I've lived through some things and experienced things in life that do give me some hope, even though depending on when you talk to me about that, I might be one of those days when I've given up, but I don't give up often. During COVID, there was an interesting article on Yahoo that I found about an 85-year-old man who said, he said, I lived through the 1918 flu pandemic when thousands of people died. I survived World War I, World War II, Korean War, the Vietnam War. And he said, I've survived all kinds of things in 85 years. He said, but my grandchildren don't think I know anything because I can't use a cell phone. So see, things are fairly relative when it comes to looking at stuff. And I kind of feel the same way. I teach American history quite often, and I feel like I've lived through most of it. So I guess that is the price we pay for getting older. If you don't get old, you die young. But ultimately, we come back, and at different times in our history, we've kind of gone through these things of asking the question, is life really worth it? I mean, what is it about a life that keeps us going and keeps us hopeful and keeps us looking forward to that? One of the things I do know is that if you hope to get old, you're going to have to find some hope and strength and some stick-to-itiveness. Nobody ever lived to be old who had a bad attitude about living and didn't want to live. An organism, and that's what we basically are, a very complicated organism. In order to live and to have a good life, you've got to find some meaning. And so that's what chapter number 2 is about, the meaning of life. And that's a big question. It's probably one of the hardest there is to answer. It doesn't mean that I have, or the book has, or any other philosopher has all of the answers, but at the same time, those answers can be rather obscure. And so we have to, most people, when they discuss this question, try to avoid this particular question and think about others. But I want to spend our time today thinking about what is it that gives meaning to life. Let's start that on the personal level. First of all, what is it that gives your life meaning? Why do you get up every morning and get dressed and go out to work, or work on your schoolwork? Or, there are people that float through life and never go to school. They don't have a job. They have nothing that they're actively living for. They exist from day to day. And sometimes so many people in our world are like that, not only just in America, where you could do better and where you have ample opportunity to do anything that you possibly want. We have the freedom to work. We have the freedom to have things, to build things, to own things. And yet some people's meaning in life is just all about the stuff. They collect a great deal of junk in their lives. And they, somebody asked, this old wealthy man died in the community, and they said, how much did he leave? And the other guy said, well, he left it all. Because you see, grave clothes don't have any pockets. So you can't take money with you or anything out of this world when you leave. And so that brings us back, if that's your only meaning. In the late 1800s, the great barons of industry, people like Andrew Carnegie or J.P. Morgan or some of the others, built great empires and amassed tremendous amounts of capital in their lives. And yet they turned around before they died and gave it all back to the public in the way of founding colleges and libraries and all kinds of things. And while the meaning in life was about making all the money you could, and they sometimes turned and looked the other way over mistreating their employees and underpaying them and cheating them and all those things, yet then they turned up in the end, donated it all back. When you listen to National Public Radio, many times you'll hear a story and they'll say, this story was paid for by an endowment from the Carnegie Institute or from the Morgan Institute or from a host of other things. And so where you find meaning is really important. And if you're going to live and enjoy life, you've got to find your meaning. I often tell my students that money ceases to be a motivator pretty quickly in life. You might be looking at that right now as you prepare for your future career. You just want to do better. You want to get to the point where you can earn more. You want to get to the point where you can kind of sit back and relax. And I'm telling you that, you may get all those things, and I hope you do if that's what you want. But then you will have made all the money you want, and then still you've got this thing of meaning. As you get to be 65, now I'm not sad about that. I'm going to live to be 100. That's my goal. And I've got 36 more good years to teach and to work and do all the things that I want to do, write books. But some people get to retirement and they sit down, and within 6 months, they're dead. They get their honey-do list done and their chair kills them. I've got an article somewhere that is really funny, but it says, your chair is killing you. And it really is, because you can't sit in front of a television set and watch sports all day and lead an active life. Human beings are designed to find meaning and purpose in life. And if you don't have purpose, you don't live very long. So the first question the text asks you is, what kind of meaning are you talking about? That question is quite interesting, and it usually will come at a point in our life, at a time of confusion, when we're depressed, or when some incident has upset our values or our expectations in life. And let's be honest, COVID was a major upset, right? I mean, it took out 800,000 people. That's 100,000 more people than we lost in the entire Civil War. And there's not hardly a family that's not been affected in the country over the loss of loved ones. I've lost over 32 cousins in the last 2 months to COVID, and that's quite depressing. I didn't have a large family to begin with, but in everyday life, when we aren't studying philosophy or we're not thinking in general about things, life it seems to be crammed full of things that we could take meaning from, that we could find hope from. There's a term paper to write, or there is an oil filter in your car to change, or you got grass to cut, or windows to wash, or meals to fix. There's all kinds of activities that are always due, that we can always keep busy doing something. But the question is, are you really happy? Happy in what you're doing, happy in the life you have. And the reality is things can always get worse. We often say, well, it can't get any worse. That is a bad thing to say, because life really can get worse. Think about the ones that have lost their partners and their children in COVID. Man, life, that's about as bad as you can get. When you live so long that you see your children die, then you've got a real problem. So what is the meaning of life? How do we undertake that? The ancient philosophers like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle asked these questions. What is the meaning of life? I think first we have to ask, what is the meaning of the meaning in this question? Sometimes meaning is interesting. The meaning of something, whether it's a sign or a word, is what it refers to beyond, something beyond itself. Beware the dog sign that you will see sometimes presumably refers to some dog, probably unseen, probably large, and probably ferocious. So there's a lot that goes into something as simple as that sign. And so when we think about that, we also think about there's so many pieces that go into the meaning of life. Socrates had a lot to say about that. He made the statement that the unexamined life is not worth living. If you can't sit down and think about the meaning of your life and where you're going and where you're headed, then there'd be no reason why you shouldn't just be a robot, because they don't think about it. I don't think the animal world contemplates thinking about things. We used to talk about humans being the only species that actually think about thinking. That's actually what we're doing here. We're thinking about thinking, asking ourselves some important questions about our lives, and we examine them and we take stock to see, if we are happy or not, or what is it that's making us unhappy. We live in days of little appreciation. And I think that is something to be thought of, that we don't really, it's kind of like they used to say about the pig eating acorns under an acorn tree. He never looks up to see where the acorns come from. And we don't want a life like that doesn't have a lot of meaning, that you're never thankful, you're never grateful for the things that you do have. You're always looking down and always griping about the things you don't have that someone else has. You won't be happy with that, and it'll lead to a very miserable existence. Someone well said in thinking about religion that the devil doesn't have any happy old people. And so this guy that heard that went out and said, I'm going to go out and see if that's true. And he went out and tried to help an old lady across the street, and she hit him over the head with their purse, and tried to help several other people. And they were just bitter and ill and unkind and unnice. My grandmother used to say, and I usually refer to her because she is in many ways, the philosophical influence of my life. My grandmother never had much education, and yet she accomplished more in her life than most people do in 5 lives. But she often would say that that people, they're either preserved or they're pickled as they get older. As they get older, they get sweeter and sweeter if they're preserved, or if they're pickled, they get more sour and more bitter. And I think those two things really have much to say about how we live our lives. People that live their lives for other people, and we'll talk about altruism later, but people that live their lives for other people will tend to be happier and more at peace and more at rest than those who live their lives for themselves and are always involved in getting more. Years ago, I worked, my first job was in a little grocery store, and I was 14 years old. And every day I ground this 50-pound bag of ice that was bigger than I was. And I carried it across Main Street, which was a four-lane road, to a little drugstore across the street. And this old doctor, a druggist, and his wife were in their 90s, and they were still filling prescriptions. They had a soda fountain in their store, and that's what the ice was for. But I'll never forget a conversation that was going on one day when I was delivering ice. And this man, and Dr. Young, the founder of the drugstore, was very wealthy. He had been working 60 years in that drugstore, 70, and he and his wife worked together. And I never will forget this guy said, Dr. Young, why don't you retire? Why don't you take your money and enjoy it? He said, you can't take any of it with you. He said, oh, son, you're wrong. He said, what I don't take home, my wife will bring with her. And he literally thought that. He thought he was going to be able to take from this life something that he would not have. The Bible book of Ecclesiastes has a lot to say about the meaning of life and about vanity of vanities and the vexation of life, because you can work and accumulate and gather all those things that you think makes life important and never enjoy them. When I lived in Colorado a couple of years, I was amazed. Beautiful place to live, beautiful place to go and camp and do all kinds of things, water and mountains and just absolutely stunning stuff. I kept seeing all these gigantic campers. I'm talking about the kind you drive, not the kind you pull. Major $300,000 jobs and then they would build a cover over them, a nice fancy carport, because of hell out there was really tremendous. It would just beat the heck out of your vehicles, and then have boats and all kind of other things. But the interesting thing was you never saw them take them out to go camping or to ride their boat on the lake, because they worked 6 days a week and 12 hours a day and never had time to do that. I'm afraid in the United States that we are just like that we have all the fancy toys, but life doesn't give us any time to enjoy them. In fact, the United States and Japan have less free time than any nations in the world, because we work all the time, but we accumulate so much stuff. There's so many Americans that rental storage space to put their stuff because they've got too much stuff at home, and they're never going to ever take it out and look at it again, and yet they want to store it and hold on to it. We are a generation of hoarders, but our stuff does not give us happiness, and it does not seem to help us. And so Ecclesiastes says it's vanity of spirit and vexation of spirit. All things are full of labor. Man can't utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, or the ear filled with hearing. The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. And so every generation kind of falls into that trap. And we ask ourselves the question then, what is the meaning of life? Now, let me give you a few solutions to what the book talks about in relation to meaning. Well, first of all, children are meaning. Many people will say that the meaning of life lies in their children and their children's children. But there's a lot of things that go into that as soon as you start to think about it. If the meaning of life lies not in these children's own lives, but in someone else's life, then what makes their life meaningful? If you wrap your life up in your children and your grandchildren, there also has to be something about your life that counts for something that is meaningful. You have life as a member of a relationship, hopefully as a couple. Maybe you don't, maybe you do. You have children, grandchildren, all of those things have some meaning. But there's a lot of us that don't have children. I find a lot of meaning in my students, and I get to mentor and help and to get them where they want to be in their career and their life. And I find I get great meaning out of that. I find meaning that, in other people's children and helping them succeed. Many people find God as meaning, find meaningful relationships in a church or a religious organization. It is a place to go, and we are social beings. And many people, I live on a golf course here at the beach in North Carolina. I know it's tough. Somebody has to do it. But I enjoy living here because of the weather. I don't know one living soul in this town, honestly, that I could call by name, but I've lived here now over 3 years. But the fact that most people will find, they get meaning out of playing golf. And this is a huge golf resort area in the country. And so there are thousands of people here that have retired, not working, but they play golf 24/7. Every chance they get. That's where they find their meaning. But we're social people. We find meaning in social activities and outlooks and things of that nature. But many will find it in the construct of religion, of a place to go. You study together, you walk together, you're encouraged together. And of course, COVID has really disrupted that. Most of us now are down to watching our religious services on Facebook or some other live stream. And that's a step away from social contact. And I think it will only make us worse. Our young people were already involved with that, with video games and things. They'd much rather hide behind a computer screen than they had to see somebody face to face. Untold numbers of mothers sit past their children's dinner through the bedroom door while they're playing video games at night and never take any time out to have personal contact. That wasn't the way I was brought up. We had dinner, we sat down, we discussed our day. We didn't have cell phones, we didn't have TV on, we didn't have radio on. We literally talked to each other. And so, that's one of the ways that we no longer do look for meaning in life. Some people have meaning in the afterlife. They're looking forward to something after this life that is a reward, and they're looking forward to that, and they're looking forward to heaven. And so those kind of things come usually with our religion, or maybe not. I mean, a few years ago, there was a comet came through called the Hale-Bopp comet, and there were several people that committed suicide to go out to meet that comet and to go on through the universe. Well, I'm not sure that they found anything when they died, but they didn't find the Hale-Bopp comet, or they might have found something worse. Then there are people that don't have any meaning at all. They just eat, sleep, exist, and go on about their business every day to the end of their life, and they're just feeding themselves and eating and sleeping and dying. So we find lots of meaning sometimes in the context of the language we use. And part of my purpose, having been a pastor for 20 years, is try to encourage people, try to uplift people, try to get them on to the next level. And I do a lot of counseling with young people and young students, trying to help them to see that there is a lot of meaning in life, but you got to be actively involved in seeking meaning. Viktor Frankl wrote a great book called Man's Search for Meaning, and I highly recommend that to you. He was in the Nazi concentration camp. And he said this, he said, when people are reduced to their lowest level of function, I mean, you're in concentration camp, they've taken your clothes, you're humiliated, you're starved. He said, when they get to their lowest, then the real spark of divinity that's in every man really comes out. He said there would be people who were at that level, would take the little scrap of bread that they were given to eat every day and take that bread and give it to someone who was dying. And rather than eat it themselves, they found meaning in helping someone else to be a better person. My dad was that kind of person. When he died in 1994, I was his pastor, and we received friends at the funeral home from 6 p.m. and at 10 o'clock, we turned away over 300 people that could not get into the building. And it had been a steady stream all night of people that came through and said, your dad brought us firewood when we were cold, or he brought us vegetables. My dad grew a garden just to give away every year. And untold numbers, I mean, in the hundreds, said our children would have starved to death if it had not been for your dad. My dad found his meaning in giving. I like Chuck Swindoll, used to be the president of Dallas Theological Seminary, made a statement. He said, there are two approaches to life. One is an open hand and the other one is a closed fist. He said, if you've got a closed fist and you're clutching and holding on to everything, afraid you're going to lose it, he said, you can't get anything out of it and God can't get anything in it. But he said, if you live life with an open hand and you're a giving person and you're a person that helps, he said, God will just keep filling your hand as long as you're using it to help other people. And so I think that is really, really true. Another approach to meaning in life can be, looking at life as a game. Some people see it as a game, and I don't mean that in a frivolous way, but you're really playing to win. Just like you take this class, it really depends upon your ability to want to do something, to succeed. I can't, the thing I get frustrated with in trying to motivate students to do well and to pass the class. I've been a student for 57 out of 60 years. I'm an expert in going to school if nothing else. And if you're not motivated to do your work, nobody else is going to be motivated for you. And it doesn't matter how much I encourage you, beg, plead, you're not going to get a grade that passes if you don't do the work. Life is the same way. You're not going to get a life of meaning unless you engage life at its very best. So you don't give up, give out, give in, you get going and get up and do something. And doing adds so much meaning to your life, you won't even realize it. Then that life is a story. Life imitates art, someone well said. And I think that's true. Your life is a story. It's a narrative. It's well worth writing that narrative down and sharing that with your children and your grandchildren so that they know what you've been through, because it might be a blessing to someone else. You can provide meaning to people when they know that. I found that true in COVID. When I began to talk about things that I've gone through in 53 years, 63 years, young people would sit up and listen because they didn't have any examples of somebody who had survived and who had fought, gone through things and been through wars and all this stuff. Some people look at life as a tragedy, always negative. Everything bad's going to happen to me, woe is me. And, that's not much of a way to live. And, the reality is we all die. I'm not any more terminal than the person, or the person that has cancer is not any more terminal than I am. We're both dying. It's just a matter of context and how we live our life. How you approach death says a lot about how you approach life. And so as we think about these things, it's really interesting that we consider tragedy. Some people, it's a comedy. Life's a joke. It's something to enjoy, to laugh about. There's a lot of different kinds of humor. And so a lot of people will find that as they go through life and understand things. Life's an adventure. Life is all, it should be an adventure. It should be something that we enjoy doing, that we enjoy, getting together, that we enjoy, and understand. But there's a lot of, and you'll read these as you read through chapter 2 about life and different people that talked about them. He does mention Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud's really an interesting guy to be included in a philosophy book. He's actually a psychologist, the first psychologist, psychoanalyst. But let me say to you that nobody has changed our life more than Sigmund Freud in his thinking about who we are as people. Then a couple of things I want to mention to you in ending this discussion. Life's also an investment. We invest in other people. The only people that I don't think I'm going to take out of this world are the people that I influence. In my history classes, I have met several young people that had a passion for history and did not have a mentor. And I'm really thrilled to be able to mentor them and stay in touch with them. And they can call me and ask questions, and we can have conversations. In a couple of weeks, I'm going up to my school where I'm working on my PhD. One of my online students is going there with me because he is interested in graduate school, and I'm going to get to introduce him to professors that I know and people that are influencers that can help him in his career. I get great enjoyment out of that, investing in his life. Some of the books you see behind me, I'm taking to him when I go because I want him to take my books and go on and use them to learn and to grow. And then some people, life is about relationships, and some people just can't live without, relationships, without somebody there for them. I have, in my years as a pastor, buried probably more than 1,000 people, and I've seen some very heartbreaking circumstances, and I've seen others that were just honestly, it was just a wonderful experience to have known the people and to see how they die. You die pretty much in relation to how you've lived. If you've lived a good life, if you've had great meaning, if you have attempted to do some things and be the right kind of person, it's a lot easier exit than the person that dies fighting and begging and screaming and trying to get another minute of life. I'll never forget my grandfather's neighbor who was quite dishonest, and he had taken land from other people and all kind of things through the years. And on his deathbed, he was a millionaire, and he called another well-known guy in the community, asked him to come around to the back of the house so no one would see him. And he came through the door, and when my friend came through the door, he said he had $500 in his hand. He said, "I cheated you out of some land years ago." And he said, "I want to make that right before I die." And my friend said, "Look, that was made right the day you did it. I forgave you the day you did it. You keep your money, take it on with you." And that man went out into whatever waited him, burdened and torn up over the way he had lived his life. And so as we think about how we live our life, it has nothing to do with religion, has nothing to do with any of these other things. It has everything to do with you and me and the choices we make and the philosophies that we have, how our world vision is. Do we live for ourselves, forgetting, groping, grasping, laying up money in the bank, for some future day? I'll never forget, had a guy buried his wife probably 30 years ago, and I'll never forget him. They had worked in the cotton mill all their life, never had any children. They had saved and scrimped and put up money and laid it back one day to say, when we retire, we're going to travel and see the country and enjoy life. And one Sunday afternoon, while they're still working, his wife said, "I don't feel very well." She said, "I'm going to go lie down." And she laid down across the bed, and he went in later and found her dead. And I will never forget what he said to me at the funeral party. He said, "Preacher," he said, let me tell you something." He said, "As you go through life," he said, "you spend a little and you save a little, but you enjoy it as you go." He said, "Now I have all this money and all these plans and nobody to enjoy it with." So if you're in a relationship, cherish that, work on that. It does give meaning to life to have someone else there with you, or to have children, or to have, look at life as a story. And think about that as you think about this chapter, as you read through it. And I think it will make a difference in how you get up and approach life every day. It's a grand experiment. It's a great story. It's an adventure to see, well, where's this day going to take me? And so those are the kind of things that have been thought about for generations. And I hope that you'll think about them and pass some of those things on to your children as well. Thank you for your time. We'll see you tomorrow for lecture 4.